Hi, I'm John Moulis and welcome to another in my series of videos about my time at the Department of Finance in Canberra and the Australian Public Service in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Now, we're into 1979 now, and I told you that that was a year of change for me because I was out of the accounting office, out of that dreadful pressure cooker situation, and back into office services. Now, I worked in office services under a fella named Macaronis, who was the OIC of office services. I didn't particularly like him, but he was a lot better than Albert or Gary from the reproduction room. I mean, so it was mainly, it was sort of a better to middling type situation. I mean, as I think of it now, I mean, you know, hindsight has 20/20 vision, as we all know. But what should have happened is that I should have resigned from the public service and gone on to a disability support pension or something like that. But I mean, welfare back then, you know, I was raised on this work ethic from my parents, who were European migrants, and the idea of welfare was just abhorrent to them. I mean, back then, people on the dole were called dole bludgers. I mean, and disability support pension was a hidden sort of pension. It was more exclusive than it is now. I mean, back then you just had to go onto the dole, and but I knew that there was something happening with invalidity pensions and that sort of thing, because you used to get the Commonwealth Government Gazette every Thursday, and that was the Bible in the public service. That people used to line up outside the government printer in Kingston here literally to get the Government Gazette as it rolled off the press, because that had details of all of the jobs there, the promotions, job vacancies, everything like that. People who'd been promoted. You know, if you were going for a job, you saw that person. When it was published in the Gazette, you could appeal against their job. And there were all of these things in the Department of Defence. And there were these long lists of people who had retired from the public service, or resigned from the public service, or been dismissed from the public service. And there were these great big long lists of people, and they had in brackets next to it, invalidity. And years later I found out that these people, if you retire on invalidity in the public service back then, you got your superannuation payout, and you could also go on to the disability support pension, or invalidity pension as it was called back then. And if you were suffering problems, you could claim compensation from the Commonwealth from ComSuper, which was a compensation scheme which was run by the Department of Finance as well. So retiring from the public service on invalidity, it was like striking gold. It was a gold mine. I mean, and these big long lists of names in the Gazette, and, you know, people retiring on invalidity. And I thought, retire? You know, I thought you had to be at least 55 to retire. But no, apparently you only had to serve a few years, and then you could retire from the public service on invalidity. All you had to do was get a doctor to say that you were incapable of work, that you were disabled, and you could retire from the public service. So that was an opportunity that was lost for me. But again, I didn't know whether I would have been eligible for that in hindsight. Like I said, during that period I thought I was normal. I mean, I didn't know that I was disabled back then, but you know, that sort of thing, yeah. And resigning from the public service and going on welfare was out of the question. I mean, my parents never would have allowed that. I mean, I still lived at home. I mean, I couldn't move out. You know, I wasn't independent. You know, I'm sort of semi-independent now, but still, back then when I was so young, and I had all these years ahead of me, the idea of going on welfare at that stage really wasn't an option. But like I said, 1979 was a year of change. I was in office services, and that was the year when this whole complaints cult started up. I told you about this in the Department of Defence. All the other staff rounding up on me and putting in complaints about me, about little trivial little things that were then whipped up into federal cases by the bosses. An incident happened in about July 1979, I think, where I was in the reproduction room again, the photocopy room, even though I didn't want to go back into the reproduction room. They put me back in there, and there was a counter there, and there was something I said, you know, by this stage I was sick of the job and sick of the public service, and we had to close. Someone came in just after lunch hour started. I mean, when I went into the reproduction room, I mean, I got them to shut the doors during lunch hour, because prior to that, the door it was open all the time. People could come in during lunch hour and with photocopying and get photocopying done, and I got them to shut the doors during lunch hour so that we could have some sort of decent lunch there, you know, and there was the printers were in there as well, and all that. And what happened is that it went about 2 or 3 minutes after 12:30. I mean, lunch hour was 12:30 to 1:30, and someone came in with copying, and I said to them, I said, look, it's lunch hour, I can't do the copying. And the OIC, the supervisor of the print room, said, John, you have to do the copying. So I did it reluctantly, and I said to Murray after I finished it, and the person walked away, I said to him, look, quick, close the door so no more scum comes in. And the Murray heard that, and the person walking away heard that, and the complaint went in, and I was charged under this section of the Public Service Act for disgraceful and improper conduct. So me actually saying something constituted disgraceful and improper conduct. I mean, that was the situation in the public service there. It was stupid. I mean, nobody was hurt, and it was a statement of fact. I was just telling him to shut the door, but they made a big thing about it. And the other thing too is that the person with the copying was a female. So that they really blew it up out of all proportion because it was a female. And I had Macaronis there saying to me, you used the word scum, you were specifically referring to her as a woman. And I said, no, I said it was a generic term for everybody. You know, it wasn't specifically referring to her. And they just jumped up and down because it was a woman involved. But I had a lot of problem with women in the public service. I mean, it was a time when women were moving into the workforce, and a lot of people were saying that the youth unemployment problem was being caused by women in the workforce, that they were taking jobs that kids out of school should have been taking. And it was a time of women's lib, and all of that had started up. And I thought that there was a dreadful double standard, because what used to happen is that they used to burst into tears. I mean, if they didn't get their way, if you said something they didn't like, they would burst into tears. And then they'd go running off into the director's office in tears, complaining about me. And it wasn't just me. I mean, other people in the department, other men in the department had to put up with this as well. And I just thought it was a dreadful double standard, that the stacks were just loaded in favour of these females, because on one hand they were talking about women's lib, you know, I can do anything that a man can do and all of that sort of thing, I have a right to be in the workforce. But on the other hand, they retained the right to burst into tears and turn on the waterworks if they didn't get their way. You know, I thought that was outrageous. I thought it was disgusting. But anyway, that was what happened, and a lot of the people who complained about me in the Department of Finance especially were females, you know, trying this tactic on. Oh, well, you know, like I said, I have no regrets about anything I did to those females there or anybody else as well. I mean, that's just my personality. That's just my makeup. You know, take it or leave it. But 1979, I was there in the reproduction room. At the end of 1979, I was shifted out of there. I was shifted to registry, which is, they kept all of the files, and they did the courier run around the department and around other departments. There was a courier with a car, government car, who used to go around the other departments. Anyway, I went, this was in December, the administrative support cells. And again, I had a lot of trouble adjusting to this. I had an isolationist view. I just sort of used to withdraw all the time and that. And Mrs. McNeil, who was the supervisor there in registry, in the administrative support cell, she sort of gave me a bit of counselling and everything like that about what was wrong with me, because she could pick up that there was something wrong with me, you know, and you know, and when I'd give answers, I was sort of closing in again, and she'd said, look, you're closing in again. And then when complaints went in to the Director of Finance and General Services about me, about my work performance, I remember she said, you know, oh, look, you know, I'm making a bit of progress with him, and, you know, the Director didn't care, you know, I mean, you know, that was that attitude towards me. I mean, in 1980, I went into registry, the main registry, and I had problems there adjusting about that. And I was wondering, you know, if other people were having these problems as well, you know, whether it was just me, because like I said, I mean, I thought that everybody else was having these problems. I thought that everybody else was like me. You know, that was how cockeyed everything was. And, you know, I saw a few of the personnel files that came into registry. These files were supposed to be kept out of registry, but occasionally a couple of them did turn up, people's personal files. And I looked at a couple of them, and a couple of people were having problems in the workplace, but there was none of them were being bullied or victimised like I was, and none of them had these sort of socialisation problems that I had as well, of interacting badly. I mean, people were being dismissed from the department. It was fairly rare, but it was happening, and people were resigning because they just couldn't hack the whole public service. They resigned and moved on and got other jobs. And, you know, like I said, I was still there in the public service. It was clear that it wasn't for me, that whole public service thing wasn't for me. But, you know, I just stayed on because you had to do it. You had to work, and I couldn't do anything else. I was unqualified. I was disabled. I couldn't pick things up fairly easily. I mean, it took ages for me to pick anything up, training and that sort of thing. But again, in the repetitive nature of the work, and just the whole thing of just being cooped up in this building for 8 hours a day. And the other thing too, I didn't have a car back then. I used to use public transport. And during those terrible Canberra winters, freezing cold Canberra winters, when there was a flu epidemic on, and having to get into those buses where you had to stand up, you were packed in like sardines, and you'd think, I hope none of these bastards sneezes or coughs. And sure enough, one of them would sneeze or cough, and you'd have to spend the next 2 or 3 days thinking, look, am I going to get a dreadful cold? Am I going to get the flu? And oh, look, it was awful. And just having to stand on the bus stops there in those freezing cold mornings with the bitterly cold wind, waiting for the buses to... Oh, look, I'm glad I'm out of that now. I could never do that again. It was just awful. It was a form of psychological torture. That's all it was. And anyway, like I said, 1980, you know, 1981 again, I was still in registry. No, at the end of 1980, I was transferred to the Royal Australian Mint. There was a brief period during that year where control of the Mint passed from Treasury to Finance. And while it was being administered by Finance, I was transferred over there. It was a bit of a dumping ground. Finance saw it as a bit of a dumping ground. And I went there, and they were issuing the gold coins at the time, those $200 gold coins. And I was helping with the packing of those gold coins. So it was, you know, I went down into the basement, into the vault, and it was this great big area. There was no money there. I mean, apparently in the early days of the Mint, when it was first opened in the 1960s, they used to keep money and gold bars down there. But by 1980, of course, all of that had been moved out. It was virtually a deserted area. And we went down there, the big door was opened, and it was a really big area, and we sat in there and we were packing the gold coins into the jiffy bags, and the Australia Post staff were there on a bench and they were processing it through and everything like that. And there were big delays because the Mint was just overwhelmed with people wanting these gold coins. They never saw the demand, and of course Department of Finance had never administered anything like the Mint before. I mean, Treasury were the experts. I mean, Treasury started up the Mint, and they were the ones who administered it day after day for many years. And then all of a sudden Department of Finance were thrown in at the deep end, having to administer this place during this period of chaos of issuing the gold coins. And of course Finance made a dreadful hash of administering the Royal Australian Mint. They were terrible. They were hopeless, and they were actually they actually had the Mint taken off them. The minister, well, I don't know, I think it was the Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, or someone very senior, was telling the politicians what was going on at the Mint under the Department of Finance, and it passed back, control of the Mint passed back to Treasury while I was there at the Mint, you know, and you know, the Mint staff were reporting to Treasury about me, and you know, that I was no good, that I was hopeless and all that sort of thing. And again, we went up to Christmas that year, and the Mint closed down on Christmas Eve, and it reopened the second week of January, and everybody had to take their leave during that period. But I was lucky because, you know, I was finance staff, so I was told that I had to move back to finance as soon as the Christmas holidays were over. You know, I think the first week of January I was back at finance, and for the start of 1981, and I was put back into registry, and I wanted to go back to the Mint, because by that stage that section of the Mint I was in had moved to Woden, had moved to Phillip, which was right near my house. I could just ride my bike down to work every morning and ride back, but they couldn't do that. I had to be there in the Treasury building again at Department of Finance in registry. And 1981, that was a pretty bad year as well, but you know, I just was there in registry and everything like that. But anyway, once again, this video is about to end, so I might as well say goodbye to you now and come back for the next video for more of this series. Goodbye.